The mighty sources of lightning heaved her staff upward, releasing a blinding surge of charged magic lightning through it as she deftly struck the ground. Tremor after tremor shifted the earth beneath them, and spires of rock and boulders were released hundreds of feet in the air, arching straight into the path of the mysterious hooded man. She had delivered the final blow.
Dinner itself was an absolute worried hush. The kind of silence that encompassed the family's air was unfamiliar than most nights. Even the gentle clacking of spoon on plate was easily muted. All instances of chewing, scraping, or Father Grixon's usual grunts and snorts sated irk fell on deaf ears, as if they never even happened. It was like silence itself was invited to the fourth chair, just across Stephen's father, and directly 10 feet from the front door. And silence had a lot to say. Stories of foretelling woe that could be felt, smelled, tasted, and feared. Perhaps Samson's end of the table, opposite the double-bolted door, is where the silence was forged. Hostility was also invited and hovered directly over where Stephen's mother sat, but she kept her lips pursed tight. Samson declared that this meal be silent with a simple flash of his stern eyes to each member of the family where they normally would have said grace. But grace hadn't been heard on the Grixon family farm for over 2 years. Maylene slowly lifted her head from the clean plate to find Samson's head upright, unmoving, with his eyes staring directly at the door. Dinner had been over for a few minutes now, at least 3 or 4. Why were they still seated? Stephen couldn't help but wonder. Even Orly, the family's hunting dog, had left the awkwardness behind, giving up on table scraps. The boy was tempted to follow. Stephen was about to position his hands on the table's edge, as if readying to push his wooden chair away.
He's coming.
I heard. How long have we got?
He was supposed to be here an hour ago.
After those few short sentences, Stephen's parents were done talking. A thunderous mechanical diesel engine quickly approached the house and was abruptly shut off. Uneven, boisterous steps were felt on the ground just before the porch and seemed to rumble the house with closing proximity, followed by a clatter. Several more steps, each louder and more rumbling than the last, and finally, a large, dark silhouette traced itself on the nearby window's curtain. The door's locks began to rattle.
Did you give him a key?
Stephen's mother whispered to her husband.
Hell no, woman, why would I?
It seemed a whisper could only do so much when concealing an enraged shout. The door was easily freed from its bolts. What would have been excitement to fill Stephen's heart to see his long-lost brother Jonathan was instantly displaced by a dark confusion. Jonathan stormed up to the dining room table, inebriated, and falling, with only the back of the chair to catch him. Stephen knew exactly what a drunk man looked like. His father taught him that lesson years ago, but never before in his life had he seen a broken man. Uninvited, he whirled himself around and sat down in the empty chair to the right of Stephen. Jonathan began helping himself to his own servings, and all the created noise and clanging quickly shoved silence out as hostility took the table round. Samson's splitting stare was fixed on his firstborn.
What the hell are you doing here?
Jonathan had not said a word in response. As he heaved a supple second spoonful of mashed potatoes up to his mouth, a vociferous slam prevented it from even touching his tongue.
John, I said, what the hell are you doing here?
Samson's fist and his table became one with a quaking crack, splitting the board beneath nearly in two.
In my house.
I'm back, ain't I? Jonathan demanded a meal and a place to stay, but his cries go unmatched. Samson's bellowing tone hijacked every bit of appetite his own son once had.
Shut your mouth and get out of my house. You have no right to be here after what you did.
The family sat frozen and alert. Stephen's entire world was flipped upside down with every booming echo of the two men's fight, as if his own soul was emptied out and filled to the brink with a brimming concoction of confusion and shock. He couldn't even cough it all out in a moment like this. The one person he used to look up to, he used to love, and emulate with every breath. The only person he could ever connect to and trust had finally returned. The sole individual who had led him down a path of life, and the guy who was once his hero, had turned into some kind of villain from old fantasy books Mr. Brecken brought every Thursday. Maybe he was replaced by some evil ogre or something. Maybe this is a bad dream. Stephen's imagination couldn't even keep up. Jonathan had evolved into something else since he ran away at the age of 18. He even looked different. A small strip of piney hair on his jaw and upper lip, shoulder-length greasy strands of it hanging from his head. But word for word, that man was Jonathan. Every cracked syllable, every slurred vowel. That man was Stephen's brother and his father's long-lost son. Stephen didn't even know what took his big brother away back then. Maybe his father and mother did. And maybe, since it seems dear old Dad had a bit more pent-up anger than he's ever seen before.
Who do you think you are, coming in my house, sitting here at my family table and eating my family dinner?
The rampaging shouts continued. Samson's rage knew no bounds.
I'm your family, damn it! I'm your son! Your son!
Finally, a solid answer actually came from Jonathan's lips that nearly matched the volume and power of his own father's. Maybe it wasn't even close. But it was filled with as much passion. Just enough heartfelt emotion to push a towering father off his hovering throne. And just as suddenly, Samson's piercing stare was lifted downward to the floor. Maybe it worked, but there was no tact in Jonathan's words, only simple desperation. It was all he could volley back in pure truth, somewhat surprising coming from this shattered, dislocated shell of a boy.
You're no son.
The awakening screech of Samson's wooden chair screeching itself backward against the hardwood floor released the boy from his defensive seated stance. Only slight blinks were made by Mother Maylene. Samson got up from his seat at the head of the table and journeyed the short distance around to where Jonathan was seated. But it felt like he walked straight through the old Grixon family dinner table. Any normal 52-year-old with the capability to do what he did next would have given any normal 52-year-old a heart attack. Samson got behind Jonathan's chair, hauled it up slightly, and sent it back 5 or 6 inches, enough for Samson to grab Jonathan's left arm and drag him out of the house.
Maylene, send the boy to bed,
was the last set of words Stephen heard from his father before he took Jonathan through the front door into the colder night outside, leaving the door to slam itself behind them. It took Stephen every little bit of strength his little body had to try and keep all the disruptive coughing below his tickled throat. Maylene, still shocked from this traumatizing event, got up abruptly to steer Stephen hastily up the stairs. The shouting of the 2 bickering men rang out across the barren country sky. Even the stars wouldn't dare to glimmer. Shouts of anger still found a way to fill the house walls, crack the wood frames, and even curl the edges of the faded wallpaper. Stephen's room in the attic was atop another set of old wooden stairs just across the short hall on the 2nd floor. Samson and Maylene's room lay just to the right and a bathroom to the left. For some odd reason, Stephen's mom had taken to ensuring every door was quickly and tightly locked shut. But with every closed door, the pain growing outside just seemed to resonate stronger. As they summited the 2nd set of stairs and entered Stephen's room, Maylene tucked him into his cold bed without a word. Stephen was left alone to the safety of his attic, and his mother's steps descended quicker down than the 2 of them came up. He could hear her reopen her room, grab their shotgun, and reseal it as she entered the battlefield of father versus firstborn. With another slam of the front door, Stephen was alone in this house. His bed was too far from the window above his desk in the corner. Mr. Brecken's chair probably saw more of the squabble below than he ever could. A third voice entered the fray. He could have just as easily untucked his sheets and taken the few short steps to the window and witnessed everything. But he was too used to turning it all off and entering the land of imagination that await him in his head.
The cleric had shed her final tear as the last drop of deep red had fallen onto the ground before her. Her one true love lay limp in her arms, leaving life behind. No healing spell could ever save this dying man.
Stephen sat at the desk that was under his window. He couldn't resist. No fantastic voyage through some uncharted land of elves and trolls could compare to what he was about to see. He could tune out Mr. B's apostrophes, even his father's duck-killing sprees, but it was next to impossible to tune out the very return of his older brother. The room got colder. All sound that drifted slowly through the pane brought more darkness, as if every shouted word commanded another star to burn out. The only light remained from the silvery moon, which was full, and a small lantern hung from the porch below him. Just enough light to see the shadows as they tussled about in the field, but even those lights were starting to dim. Though the screams could be heard throughout the entire house, Stephen could just barely make out what they were saying.
Then why'd you come back? You won't go doing what you did around here again, you understand me?
Maybe that was Father.
Just let me stay here. I won't bother nothing. Come on, I got no else. Those fools downtown don't understand me. They don't know what it is I could do.
That was John.
Stop this fight. Stop this fighting, please. You'll trigger it again.
Mother. Trying to be diplomatic. It was no good. Stephen had gotten so cold that he left the window briefly to grab a sheet from his bed and wrap it around himself before returning to the show. But honestly, he didn't mind the cold. It chilled him down to the deepest part of his tiny lungs, making it easier to suppress those painful coughs. But it was so dark on the way back that he nearly tripped on Mr. B's chair. After the clatter of his falling chair ceased, so did the shouts outside. The words had stopped. The fierce yelling had ceased. The walls no longer shook with the ice of rage. Only shouts that remained were his own, begging him to stay awake for just a bit longer. Just a bit longer. 3 silhouettes danced in the dark, like a ballet for twilight. First it was 3, then it was 2 and 1. One dancer grabbed a single partner as they danced as a duo, leaving the third to dance solo. Then 3 again, as if each dancer moved about in unison, though none of their moves matched, until it was 1. Just 1. The 3 shadows were dancing too close. It was difficult to see who was who, difficult to see where their props had moved, where their legs were kicking, their arms were flailing, where that gun had gone. Mother's shadow was the small one, but where? Father's, the shadow with the hunch, and John's? Where is John? Where is the gun? The lights followed. Every star that had left the sky just returned, but as if they shot off from a single source. The third dancer. The third shadow. The lights shot off and flashed wildly as the 2 other dancers jumped back in fear. There they were, all 3. Some unknown music began to fill the air outside and resonate in Stephen's frosty room, like explosions of choral tone and wonderment, unheard, painful sounds no human should ever witness. Magnificent, miraculous, mortifying. Then nothing. But one last shout. A final plea for help. Then a deafening ring in Stephen's ears began to lull him to sleep. He managed to squeeze in one final glance before sleep claimed him completely. No longer were there 3 shadows standing out in the field. There was one enormous shadow, cast by what could have been a crater spanning from the picket fence to the patio steps just below his window. If he would have mustered up even 1/10 of a second worth of eyelid strength, or half that for one eyelid, he would have seen the single remaining shadow out there, naked and kneeling over where 3 once stood, drowning himself in his own tears, an outstretched arm reaching for the moonlight.
The young child just couldn't do it. He thought it was impossible to do such a thing. That's much too dreamlike. Fly like a bird, float like a cloud in the sky. I'll never be able to do that, he said. But then he remembered what his old mentor taught him. Anything is possible. Just believe.
Stephen awoke the next day, surprised that he actually got a good night's sleep in such a short time. I thought I was up so late watching. What was it? What was I seeing? He was also surprised to see that it wasn't even morning yet. The stars were still out, accompanied by an even brighter moon. Stephen. Hey. Stephen. A voice startled him as he jumped up in his bed. It was familiar, but somehow different. Stephen. We need to go. John. Where's Mom? And Dad? I need to tell you about the last 3 years. Where did you go? For so long. The boy coughed up some blood between words. Whoa, that cough, it sounds bad. Pretty bad, I guess. Where have you been? Away. Trust me, it was for your own good. Mom, Dad, those people weren't your parents. They didn't even know you. They don't know us. What? Listen to me, Stephen. Listen close. There's something inside me, and I can't control it. And honestly, it could be in you too. I just can't be too sure. How long have you had that cough? What is it, brother? What is it? Jonathan let out a small chuckle from the side of his mouth. Stephen couldn't tell if this was the same happiness he used to see in his older brother back when they used to do everything together, all those years ago. It's the energy of a million stars, all gathered in one place, together, in harmony. If I harness it correctly, I can reach out. Jonathan's hand was now outstretched towards his brother's chest. And I can take all the solar energy emitted across an enormous radius of space, and then it becomes me. I can do whatever I think of, whatever I dream of. I can do. I think, I feel like I'm getting close to controlling it. Anything you dream? Did you dream of killing them? I don't know. I'm not sure. I just wish I could understand it better. Maybe you can help. Come on, let's go. Out of bed, bud. Stephen couldn't remember the last time anyone called him Bud. Okay, come on, get up. Stephen didn't move. He didn't budge. His eyes were wide open, staring at the person who claimed to be his brother. Okay, look. Here. Let's try something. Jonathan's arm was again outstretched towards his brother as Stephen's eyes slowly centered, focus on the middle of his palm. Okay. What is it that you've always dreamed of? Something you've always wanted to do? Someone or somewhere you've always wanted to be? Stephen smiled, followed by one final cough. The strange magical man dressed in emerald green winked as his feet began to lift off the floor. He began calling out to the young child, whose eyes grew wider with every inch the man had flown off the ground. "Just believe," he said. And the child began to believe.